The Shills made fun of this as part of the stupid, boorish Middle Western style of Chicago's 1920s style. That is no theory, and Rich Lloyd loved that. Okay, after a while, finally he became. So then he did the PhD, finished the PhD. He still had minimal theory. He then spent 5 years revising this, drastically became a new book. And he played up the theory coming after the PhD. And so he's got the wonderful chapters of, for instance, of how I won't try to, for reasons of time, I'll skip on, but the waiters, the waitresses, the bar, the conversation, the way their tips, they go to each other's places, they have so little money, they want to be poets or they want to be painters and so forth, but they're friends during the week when nobody's there and nobody's tipping, and so they go there and they give away all their money to the others. So they're so non-materialistic that they give away their tips and they don't have any money, and so therefore they have to put in more hours, and therefore at least they have an excuse not to write any poetry and not to. Okay, so I mean it's a wonderful example of the micro specifics that you can look into and elaborate as he does wonderfully, and I'd say that's the best of what Bourdieu does as well. Is things like that, how they work. Maybe I should stop there for the beginning introduction. Anybody want to pursue any of those themes, or that is I can go on, and especially to the Dan Silver paper. But if we got things you want to discuss related to this, let's give it a shot. Just dropping in very briefly, bringing in David Brooks. That is, I'm bringing these things because this is not just Rich Lloyd, but these things are people are. I mean, the Gouldner book was a salvo that really crystallized debate over critical sociology, and we have now critical. So the term came from Adorno, critical sociology, and it's still there. David Brooks, with his background writing for the New York Times, does not mention ethnicity in his main Bobo books, two main books, and one person in a commentary said, "Isn't this Jewish?" And he replied, "Yes." So I won't try to blow that up and beyond that if you like, but I will link that to Alvin Gouldner, and I'll link it back to Max Weber's Ancient Judaism. And Jesus Christ was just one of a whole lot of other people. When the Syrians and the Persians and others the Egyptians were getting tough again, these people came out and let's be prepared, and the king is not preparing well. You Israeli king, you should be, etc. And you should have a new, etc. So the idea of that is coming. I went to college. Well, I shouldn't just say go to college. John and I both went to colleges outside New York, but coming into I didn't go to high school in New York. John did. Okay. It hit me hard in graduate school at Columbia to see the New York subway culture being visibly there and then being actively used in debate and discussion in workshops, and seeing it in ways that I hadn't seen it before. And so I'm more conscious, and then coming to Chicago, that you see the different, and then people here fighting and especially when I came here, Chicago had the Department of Sociology, University of Chicago had a much more closed, anti-Berkeley, anti-Columbia, anti-Harvard closed style. So that in that sense, New York Jewish is and we have it on the reading list. If you haven't seen it, take a look at Arguing the World. It's a fantastic film, documentary, website, and so forth, with Daniel Bell and three other brilliant New York, nationally important New York intellectuals, and where and how they changed from being Marxist in the 1930s, or three of them changed, and one did not change the whole time. Okay. So in that sense, Alvin Gouldner fits with that, and I can even say, we didn't have Arguing the World at the beginning, and I said to John, we argue, most of the students here, they don't know about this stuff. He said, oh, but everybody knows it. It's just there all the time. Okay. When I first showed up in graduate school, it hit me hard. Okay. So I'm simply saying, we're not New York. This is an important subculture within them. It's internationally critically and important. And it was a major driver of Berkeley. Except Mike Out's an exception. He's Catholic. But he has. Yeah, okay, I won't try to go beyond it, but.
And which is important for understanding, for knowing his work. And Mike Hout was very close in collaboration with Father Andrew Greeley that was at Chicago that Terry mentioned before.
They were both at Arizona.
Yeah, I wanna, if no one is gonna prompt something, one thing I think is really interesting about the Lloyd book is, it's just that I was amazed to hear you say that there was no theory. Because to me, this is so rich with these insights.
After the PhD.
Yeah, great. It's amazing. It's like to know that you can continue to learn, right? You think like just because you don't have theory now doesn't mean it won't come. Because there's still theory still. But he one of the things he says is like almost everyone here is young, which is a way which tells you that they're not making it, right? Like they must be dropping out because they're not all becoming famous. And so what I think, you have these people that this is one part of their life stage, but also he's describing Bohemia as one part of a neighborhood's life stage. That is, you can't really stop something. It's like a frontier. This is when it becomes cool, but when a neighborhood becomes cool, then the businessmen start going there because there's a cool place for lunch, and then they start moving in, and the hippies get priced out, whatever. And that normal neighborhood cycle, something that the classic Chicago school people are always very interested in, here sort of intersects with individuals' life cycles. And so you have these places that seem to have an eternal youth because they only work with a kind of young person who's willing to sort of self-exploit, as he's always emphasizing, like that they're being cool on their own salary, as if you'd expect the cafe to be like, can we get you some piercings? It's like, I had to buy these piercings myself, but it's true, like the cafe, the owner makes money by virtue of the fact that the young people are investing in cool, and that is self-negating in a way, like just as they will get older and then the tattoos are not so good, right? You're like, oh. So too, the neighborhood will get older. It will be filled with, financiers and business school professors and all those other kinds of people who are going to exploit hipness and contribute nothing to it. I love that way in which you have these kind of two life cycles that place in the person.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how the neighborhood then draws on this. It's portray itself to the outside. I was once Wicker Park. This is he describes that where the cafes continue to nurture this style as part of the venues, the galleries. That's their brand almost. Is cashing in on this thing that had happened before. But your uncle who peaked in high school and still tells you about being a quarterback or something. It's kind of the same vibe, but it did feel the way it felt with Wicker Park felt more ephemeral, where I felt some other neighborhoods keep this cachet for longer and stronger, like it just felt like very just like commercialization happened like really intensely. But I don't feel like that's always the case for all kinds of neighborhoods. Like some of them stay strong, like subculturally.
I don't know whether they stay strong. I love this part of Lena. I was just reviewing this where she says slumming reinforced the increasingly widespread perception of the city as a patchwork of internally homogeneous neighborhoods with residents from some working or lower class groups segregated by ethnicity, race, culture, also perhaps sexual preference or gender identity. For example, Boys Town, Chinatown. It's not clear that things work, like that there's constancy. It could be that gets restored with authenticity projects, with cultural investments.
Jeff Parker did a PhD in the last couple of years, and he followed up on Wicker Park and contrasted it with Bronzeville and with the Irish Catholic Bridgeport neighborhoods. And a key driver, and what he was very good in reading Lloyd very closely, and seeing the importance of the bars and the owners of the restaurants, and then Rich Lloyd doesn't say much. Well, there's a little bit about it, but he then went what he did. Jeff Parker following up said, I mean, that is the artists are gone. The artists have moved away 10, 15 years after the book. Almost all our artists are priced out of the area. It's too expensive. Stockbrokers, lawyers, and so forth. But they're different. They are more bohemian, or that is, they're in a more bohemian surrounding. And where and why? What maintains it? And so what he pursued was interviewing the shop owners. And that was, and this is exactly what I'm making my more general point, like the curators with Lena. So look for people who are really the drivers. And his empirical research, looking for different other sources of change or maintenance, was the shop owners who talk with each other and who have an active group of shopkeepers, and they say, how can we maintain the bohemian style of Wicker Park, even though our artists are being priced out? And the answer was, we must keep the right clothes, the right things in the on display in our shops. And there's a cafe, which is also a bookstore, which also puts on lectures and discussions, and they have a strong green feminist artist lifestyle of what it is featured and they're not trying to make money. They're doing this, they're committed as you hear as part of the perspective. So in that way, the look for the drivers, look for the specifics, and then where and how these may be. And so then one more that they did was to have, I think it's once a month, Saturday night, they have art galleries and artists owners bring their paintings back, and they make available one or two buildings right at the center of the Wicker Park area. And those people then there are many people who come from Hyde Park or suburbs and so forth, and Saturday night there's a big crowd there, and people are looking and then talking with the artists, and that then shows the old Wicker Park culture, even if people are moved away. Good dynamic to generalize from. Is that look for where are the drivers, and in that sense, Rich is spending all those hours in the bars paid off. And he really found some wonderful stories like that. Should I talk about Dan Silver?
So here's what I think. What I would like to do is to just say something that makes that exactly that bridge, right? So and I think Jeffrey Park. We should put Parker's work on the syllabus here. So so there's this interesting thing, which is that. As Daniel Bell always argued, one of the things that's interesting about late 20th century American capitalism is that you can be bourgeois at work and bohemian and consumption. That this is a stable pattern. It's not it's not something that seems to be psychically difficult for people, which means that there's a demand for experiences that are class discrepant, and it leads to this difficulty where nobody wants to live in a neighborhood that's just the Starbucks and the Banana Republic, but the kinds of people who can afford to live in the neighborhood will tend to drive out those stores, right? So when these store owners, you say that they're not interested in making money, whatever, but they certainly don't want to be working. They want to have their own. You'd rather have their own little boutique, even if they have to work 18 hours a day in it, than to be a manager at Banana Republic, right? And it takes a fair amount of work to prevent a neighborhood from changing, but it can be done. It's like one of those authenticity projects that brings us back to some of the things we talked about last week, right? They have to do work to be themselves, and they have to use political power to keep themselves from becoming something that they don't want to think that they are, if that makes sense. It's almost like they're constructing a theme park for themselves to live in, like Gatlinburg or something like that. But the biggest rule is that you can't say it's a theme park, right? Like that would ruin it. So to have like a cool neighborhood, right, often requires businesses to work at this. And so this brings us to the Scenes project that Terry and Desic. So you never say what the data are. So I wanted to start. Back before you could use like internet trawling for things like this, they started to digitize information in Yellow Pages, which is a guide to businesses that businesses have to buy this stuff, but it used to be very widespread. And so you could figure out in any area what was the profile of businesses. And this turned out to be a remarkably good way of getting a feel for, as Terry's going to tell you about, variation, variety.
Thank you. Let me use one more transition, which was another student did a BA, Jennifer Lee, and she was from LA, and she had she wanted to follow up on Rich Lloyd and Bourdieu, and those were her main hypotheses, and she wanted to study the LA Arts District and see if it was like Wicker Park, and she expected that the shopkeepers would be trying to maximize their incomes, and that they would use something about Bohemia or maybe something about the arts and photography, but she wanted to understand where and how they would change and make it exciting, how its buzz could be generated. And she basically found that she, in her mind, after interviewing as Jeff Parker had done with these shopkeepers, she said, I was wrong. They all say they want to define the neighborhood as an arts neighborhood, even if they didn't make money. They want, so she put it in those conflicting terms. Basically, she went on to MA, PhD at Oxford, et cetera, et cetera. But so she's a very smart, talented BA, but she looked for, and so in that sense it was like, okay, I won't stay with what's here. So I'm following up on John's point about how can we look at these shops. How can we make sense of these? But how can we compare Wicker Park to other neighborhoods? Are they really any different in terms of how they work, in terms of the numbers of cafes, numbers of restaurants, numbers of clubs, which or say this bookstore which has the, so how can we systematize this across the U.S. and around the world? So we found some of the Yellow Pages. Well, basically, we found two things. One was the Yellow Pages. The second was I called up the census and I said, don't you have any data that, because that is all the research. The best research on cities was by economists, geographers, sociologists, and they all use they're called county business patterns. It includes, so Rich Lloyd's, all of his, sorry, not Rich Lloyd, Richard Florida. Rich Florida uses metro area data. And the economist, it makes sense for the economist as an economy because the metro area is more of a market. So as a market unit, it makes sense because people live in suburbs. They may work downtown or not. And so you don't need to worry about the political boundaries if you're focused more on markets. But in passing, I will mention Rich Lloyd does say nothing about the alderman, nothing about politics, nothing about power in that classic sense of parties and interest groups and so forth. But but some of the others do, and we wanted to be able to combine these things and to test where and why may parties and class and these things make an impact, and how do these how can we weigh in different ways that we can assess the differential dynamics of these multiple ways of doing things. And so this in turn grew out of, I mean, I think I really have to say, this grew out, I was founder and worked with people for president of the international, with the American and the International Sociological Association of people who worked on cities. So we worked with people who are experts on cities around the world. But and then we said, okay, let's share some data and do this, but let's agree on doing things that are shared, and so we and we included Polish Marxists, under strong communism, etc. Italian Marxists who were in southern Italy and who were, solidly, etc. But so we wanted to do it in a way that everybody would still agree, and therefore being strict on following consistent data. So I called up the U.S. Census and said, don't you have any data on industries that we can get below the metro area is just too big? Okay, can we get some? Oh yeah, we have. It's called BizIn. So, oh really? I've never seen this. Where can we find this? You have to put it in order, and we'll create a CD-ROM, and we'll send you a custom job, and it will cost maybe $300, and wait 3 months, and then they'll send you a CD-ROM. Then you get the CD-ROM, and you can spend 2 years because it's not documented. It's very hard to use. It's very opaque, and so we spent a long time figuring out how this damn thing worked. But it was very powerful. It covered every zip code, 40,000 zip codes in the whole U.S., and it included bars, clubs, men's clothing stores, and it was pretty good. So we had about 150 of these. Then we had about 300, so a total of over 500 if we have the yellow pages and the BizZip combined. And so this is what Dan's paper is a good summary of the kinds of things that were going on to build these things. And so he introduces and makes the point that these smart economists are saying, we don't have cross-national systematic consumption kinds of data which can get down to variations. That is, it's all national, and we can't, and it's too crude. So metro is bad, national is even worse. Okay, so we wanted to get down to as small a unit as we can, and so now for many purposes, for several of you, you know what the stuff is available with what we have today, is we also have points, not just a zip code. A zip code is fine if you want to publish and show the data, but you can't. In the U.S. generally, their data, their issues of anonymity, and you can't disclose the name of one firm because that's violating anonymity. Okay, so therefore the BizZip is a solution, but the point is these permit choosing not just restaurants or services, services. 1950s, the idea of looking at services instead of industry, that was a revolution. services is now something like 60% of the GNP, you've really got to look at specific subtypes. So we then would find, say, tattoo parlors. There's a Bohemian index. So we look for things like types of deviant cases that are particularly, but then we didn't just choose one type, like only a tattoo parlor. We took all the data for all these types of business, and so in the rest of parts of the world, they don't call them business. They call them, in China, they call them industrial categories. So these industrial categories have numbers which are almost identical in France and I think in China as well. So the idea is, don't just choose one thing, even though it's great for the ethnographic part, but use all the data. Don't throw the data out. Keep in all the cases and of all these types, but then give them scores in terms of the degree to which they may be Bohemian. And so then we can give it a 1 to 5. And so we've got this listed here, and then on page 3, basically list these 15 dimensions. So this came from a very different way of methodology. So in terms of methodology, what Dan spent almost a year reviewing. That Dan, I'll mention, Dan's background was in social thought, not in sociology. He never had a single statistics course in his life, and his PhD was on the street in Baudelaire. Okay, the street as conceived of Baudelaire's poetry. Okay, that's a little bit like Benjamin, but he then gradually picked up what he wanted to, and so I'm applauding Dan Silver because he would pick up stuff, and you'll learn. He's picked up AI and LLM in the last couple of 5 years and been publishing active stuff in the AJS. Okay, she's learning faster than I am in doing that, but I'm trying to do the same. Okay, so what he did, that is, I had the idea of doing this, but he implemented it, and we have what we have not just tattoo parlors. We wanted to say we want to rise to a higher level of generality that we can use in China, in France, in South Africa, and we want these things to be able to be used internationally in ways that we can compare quantitatively and conceptually. And then we can say, how do we have more bohemianism in Asia or not? And we found then, God, say Bohemian. Ask the Japanese, the Taiwanese, the Koreans, and say, what's Bohemian? They've never heard of it. So these things vary substantially around the world, and they permit you then to go in within one country, to then go into one neighborhood, and then to try to get a sense of where and why Atlanta or Faulkner's novels of one town in Mississippi really have this or that. Okay, so we have these 15 dimensions, like glamorous, formal, transgressive, neighborly, exhibitionistic. Authenticity includes, so authenticity, I'll add, there were lots of debates on what's authenticity. I mean, it's too sloppy. So what we did, so we created 5 dimensions, 5 subtypes. So if you have difficulties because people differ, create some subtypes and say, okay, let's have local authenticity, ethnic authenticity, corporate authenticity, and so forth. And so these are ways of trying to make things more specific. And then these can be both normative in the way that term is used in normative economics. That is, that label I ought to do sociology. So other social sciences ought to do this more actively, and explicitly distinguish between a normative discussion and a positive discussion. And the normative discussion is, I'm a boho. I mean, I live in Wicker Park. This is what's good, and I really like this, etc. So it's a normative ideal, even if not 100% of the people living in Wicker Park follow it. So articulating so in that sense, I'm cheering on with Weber and qualifying the sole use of propositions and say and would say we need both propositions, but we can say the propositions are going to change in different subcultures. And one way is to look at things like Bohemian. And I mentioned Bohemian because there's a huge, even though Rich didn't read any of it until after his PhD, there's a ton of literature from Baudelaire and from the especially the French inspired building on Bohemian and then Bobo. Okay, so I'm giving you, in a sense, a mixture which we usually haven't done in this course, but I'm doing it explicitly simply to say and pointing out, as I did earlier today, Baudelaire was the source of Benjamin and these big theoretical folks, Benjamin and Habermas, put in a huge amount of effort and working on the raw data. And so we have long essays. There's a book more of Benjamin with chapters on photography and he doesn't cite Adorno, but how he uses photography to refute Adorno. That is why photography is a mechanically reproduced type of, and he makes the point, it can be an art. And so he cites the great 19th century, late 19th century, 20th century French artists who were also photographers. And so he says we can have a snapshot which may have minimal aesthetic sensitivity, or it can be, and so Baudelaire brings out the subtlety of these concepts even in refuting Adorno. So my general point is Max Weber said, I mean, he said you often have to spend a lot of time doing this, but he didn't do this, and he spent a couple of weeks doing this. I'm doing this numerically and so, but what he did was to immerse himself in India and in ancient Jews and in China, to write those books to try to better understand the Protestant ethic, and if look at them all together, and it has power. Okay, so then how do you take the data? You can take it nationally, get the average for the whole U.S. 45,000, but then we'd break it up into South, West, Midwest, and Northeast, and shows that, is there any difference? I presented this with two Marxist workshops at UCLA and USC, both English geographers who were open Marxists and who said you're wrong in terms of the importance of consumption. LA, the city of LA is no different than Chicago or New York. If you talk to them and look at what they do on the weekend, that yes, they dress up elegantly like Marilyn Monroe and talk about Marilyn having a dressed up style, but on the weekend she did not, and that more generally they so it means both these so taking that branch of the Marxist subgroup within Berkeley. You got the crude version from Marxist geographers. Michael Deere was head of the, etc. And so I mean, I thought about it for a bit, and one thing which is right here. What's the difference between, so we get to the next one, the top 10 most important Yellow Page amenities in LA, New York, and Chicago. Is there any way to introduce to that discussion that would be useful? That is, how can you use this for big theory, a little bit of data? Anything you'd look for with those data, knowing you've got that there? Or say you don't have the data, but you have some of the numbers here. Page 7, LA, number 10. The top 10 yellow page shops are in LA, not found in the top 10 in New York, not found in the top 10 in Chicago. And what is it? Children's clothing are these people going to the film studio for work? I rest my case. Okay. So let me, maybe I'm almost going to just
And Chicago,
stop
what
there.
do we have more of that other cities don't have? Hospitals and Chicago's and Baptist churches, exactly. So, yeah, like get sick, die, and have them give you a funeral. That's what we specialize in. Yeah.
But it's localism and neighborliness are highly related with the idea of charisma in Chicago. That is, to be charismatic is to if you want to be an alderman, a popular novelist like Andrew Greeley, that is I mean, New York has internationally important novelists. So Chicago has Andrew Greeley, right? Saul Bellow. So Saul Bellow, even in one of his best novels, without O'Hare, it's sheer despair was one of his lines. Okay, so Chicago's distinctive. Just one quick point is that is the most studied city in the world, and I came here for this reason, and many others. Max Faber came here because this is the most because this had such extremes. Al Capone, gangs, murders, and the like. And as Weber said in his own words, you know, it's like the city as the skin is pulled off, and you can see these things palpitating inside in ways that you can't in Berlin or Paris. Okay, so the charismatic in New York and LA is related to education, to high status, to transgressiveness, and to self-expression. Not in Chicago. Chicago, charisma, if you are local and neighborly, very different. My one-liner is, the urban Polish Jews went to New York, the Polish rural Catholics came to Chicago. And the egalitarians of the 1920s, 1930s book on the Polish peasant showed that, in the largest ethnic group in Chicago for the 20th century was the Poles. Okay, so the I don't want to talk too much, but there and some of you may have looked at this paper, and I don't. This paper, and of course the book version is 400 plus pages. It's called Scenescapes, and is mentioned here as well. But this is a good, crisp introduction. Comment, question?
Yeah, so I have a question because I'm also in the urban innovation class. So I want to ask, like the scenescape is like very holistic like theory. So it's like treat everything like all the amenities, and also people wearing in different kind of colors. But in reality, like there's a lot of like distinct experience like among like different kinds of like actors. Like there are people who are opening the shops, there are people like recently moving in, there are tourists, and there are people trying to move out. So I'm just thinking about like how to, like, is it necessary or how to understand the different kinds of actors in these scenes? So they are not only just a part of the scene, like they're movable and they can do something. So they are different from the physical structures like the shops or murals. So
we chose the term scene because we did not invent it, and it clearly has many different meanings. Often say the jazz scene, such as implying that the jazz scene is one scene in Chicago, and that everybody who likes jazz thinks and does the same thing. Whereas the thrust of what we try to say is to build on exactly what you've said, to say we have people who are moving in, there are people who are moving out, we have people who are older, we have different age cohorts, and so all of these are useful tools. That is, the general idea is this is not meant to replace anything. It is in terms of a general theory. It's tried to add context, and so in that sense, John implied I was critical or threat. That is, I would say, at least what I tried to say in most of these debates is that with all the readings we got here in each of these courses, there are lots of things to learn from, but it's usually not that one is right and one is wrong. That is, Bourdieu is not simply right or wrong. Let's to try to say where and why, what's the context where Bourdieu's hypothesis or interpretations do hold, and where it holds more strongly or weaker, and then how can we measure those? Either with deviant cases, which the deviant case like the children's clothing store deviant case in one city, whereas the idea tried to define theory as to include, not, quote, the normal thing the philosophers of science say, assumptions and propositions and interrelated views which link the abstract theory with the empirical work. I mean, that's a classic definition of science from philosophy of science. I would qualify and say, instead of calling assumptions, we don't need always to have assumptions. If we're comparing especially cities or smaller units, let's look for and find places or units which change which vary empirically. I say let's not just say what are, so some of our faculty meetings would say, what are the assumptions of that person who we're going to hire, whether in their paper, and my follow up is not that, but to say, how are you testing how much, where and why, how much is the theory, say, about what maintains bohemianism in Wicker Park, and if it's the shopkeepers rather than the residents, that's important to say. And so Rich did not play that, and as I said, he didn't say a word about the alderman, but where Jeff Parker has tried to do this, that is, other people follow up. You can try to bring in other variables and other sources, and then try to see where why this may. So I'm accepting each of your points and saying, in principle, let's try to find different contexts where we can see these recent arrivals, say people who recently have moved into Wicker Park, who don't know about the background of its bohemian past specifically, but you may have chosen. Many of them who have moved there, we know from other things, they are different from Hyde Parkers or Lincoln Parkers. They've gone to Wicker Park because it does have a bohemian residue of a something. Follow-ups.
And if I can, on that issue of the heterogeneity, I think one of the things that's interesting about the whole the scenes-based approach is that this is taking stuff that was happening, organically. People are making these scenes, and they're investing in keeping them going. But in recent years, a number of urban planners and urban politicians, in part because of the work that Terry and his colleagues, his collaborators have been doing, are taking this more as something that municipal policy needs to be thinking about, because cities that cultivate these are going to do better economically than those that don't. So trying to figure out, like, what are the tax incentives to have a wide variety of interesting neighborhoods, right? But as JX said, like, there's heterogeneity here, and I think the thing that's interesting is that sometimes the heterogeneity works to support a scene. It's not a problem. And if you think about Richard Lloyd's work, one of the things he's pointing to is the way in which many of the people are, without being paid to it, they're contributing to the health of this scene, right? It's a little bit like the Renaissance Fair, where there's some people who are paid there, but most of what makes the Renaissance Fair feel Renaissance is all the people who are going to the Renaissance that are coming dressed up like or their idea of the Renaissance, which is usually pretty Middle Ages, right? It's become more of a Middle Age thing. Well, I don't know. I've never been there. That's what people say. But in other cases, folks, the heterogeneity can threaten to wreck a scene. So a great example is in Germany, there are these villages that are famous for looking very quaint at Christmas. People come from all over the world around Christmas to try to experience these German villages. But the ones that are on the map for international tourism have tour buses clogging the streets. And so it doesn't feel like in this case, the people coming to experience it, unlike the Renaissance Fair, they don't add to the scene, they detract from it, right? So figuring out how to make scenes so that those different, the different people coming together don't ruin it is actually a difficult question for urban planners. And actually that's one of the things that Silver works on at Toronto, is talking to urban planners about how to construct these scenes so that they're supportive and not self-negating.
Dan and I work with especially 3 Chinese who were here for a year or 2 each. And they went back and they created the Scenes Academy. And we started with a group like this around a table, and it's after 7 years, there are now over 500 papers published on scenes in Chinese journals, and the last December meeting included 1.9 million online participants. So the linkage which exploded was that some of these connections led to the National Chinese Plan, the 5-year plan, dropped the economic growth, which was the classic from Mao onward, the driver of the economic production of the structure of the economy. They dropped those goals and they said we want to focus on consumption, and they introduced scenes in 6 places, from working to consumption to leisure to cultural tourism, and that in turn then led, for example, when in Shanghai, they started the city and the University of Shanghai appointed a professor of public policy to lead a new institute to do innovative things for the economy and for everything with urban innovation in the biggest city in China, and so someone from the city said, you should be doing something on scenes. That's now in the 5-year plan. And the executive director said, what's a scene? He didn't know anything about it. So he had a student come here and got a Harris School degree, and then took courses and then took these things back. But my point is, this is what led to the 1.9 million. That these things are being actively discussed, and and we learn that as people will ask questions such as we're asking here, and we'll try to respond. But it's not just me and Dan. It's many people are writing. Hundreds and hundreds of Chinese are advancing the scenes theory and with all kinds of new data and new ways of doing things. So there's not one strict way of doing this.
What I want to throw out is this. So one of the things I think is interesting here is trying to capture this. Does go back to Benjamin and to Flanner and to Baudelaire, the fact that we've had a hard time talking about urban experience from an aesthetic standpoint. Despite the fact that in some ways we know that this is paramount for people's experience. The great urban theorist Andrea Briganti says, you know a city the way you know a face. Cities, the way we respond to cities is actually much more like the way we respond to people. They have a sense, a feeling for us, and we say, even though cities are very large, and when we think of a city, we may be thinking of only some parts of a city, some neighborhoods, there is something about that experience that we've kind of missed in our understanding of urban process, which is the capacity for people to come up with a sense of a feel, and the idea that feel might happen at a very local level, one that was difficult to get, I think is that accords, well, that's a very Chicago way of thinking, right? Because Chicago was this city of little neighborhoods that were seen to be more homogeneous. Not the way, like in a lot of other cities, including London, including New York City, there's the idea that like the center is the real city and that outside is less city. And so while people in Brooklyn, for example, like their neighborhoods, these neighborhoods were not considered to have distinct personalities. And I think it's fascinating. There's something about this Chicago emphasis on localism that's resonating translocally, that people are, you know, responding to this as a way in which we can make sense of the actual terrains. And Toronto, which is where silver is, I think is a really interesting case. It's one of the maybe 2 fastest growing cities in the New World now, right? It's gigantic, sprawling, and it doesn't have enough of a sense of internal organization. And so cities where there's not a sense of where you are, if you David Lynch's work on how people experience cities is a classic here. Where people don't have an aesthetic sense, they have a displeased reaction to being in cities, where it doesn't make sense to them, they don't have a feel. So the idea that planners are actually going to start to break up cities and theme them in a way. So you know, like I think you guys are thinking more in terms of like this organic authenticity, but I think of this as being like the great planning project of the future, when every city, it's like Westworld, like now you've come to like a Westworld. And this is something that I think was innovated really by Chinatowns. They were the ones where businessmen got together. They said, we need a consistent theme, we need it demarcated, and then when you're in here, you're gonna contribute to that by participating in it, and like you're gonna stick to the plan. That became that kind of idea of theming downtowns then has spread to across the world. Like lots of places there are actual codes on how you can open a business because you have to fit the kind of theme, but it's a heavy-handed attempt to give that kind of unified aesthetic experience.
And this is why China is so exciting, because you know, we don't have one little Chinatown. We've got the huge economy, population, etc. And then entire cities, 4 million people are created out of nothing, and bang, and then they want to follow these kinds of ideas, and so then they created a mall, they created and so one where there was initially just Shanghai and Beijing, but now they've got nighttime cities and nighttime neighborhoods that are spreading all around China. And so there's a whole literature which it started in part in Paris. They had called Nuit Blanc, of having illuminated night times, but it's now exploding in China.
Erica, you?
Yeah. Well, I had some thoughts about some keywords that came up just now about some phrases thrown out, such as social responsibility belonging to city planners. And I had a question basically that I think Professor Clark is already starting to answer. But what I was interested in was this notion of social responsibility in city planning. That kind of sounded like the role of art curators.
The role of what? Art curators? Okay, yeah, yes,
Curators.
yes.
And then this brings us back to some themes that came up earlier, which was like drivers of change.
Yes.
So, and like this notion of how do we not ruin scenes or maybe social engineer what's
Gentrification,
good for people.
right.
Okay, but I'm just interested in this notion of, okay, if they're really drivers of change, and they probably, these larger institutions or governing bodies, I mean, they probably have the financial resources and connections, networks to probably really enforce that, like you were starting to say with the example in
On
China.
a large scale.
On a large scale, right. And I think it makes sense because also not everyone can or want to take social responsibility, like with just like recycling and trash on the streets here in Hyde Park, and like, who's gonna take care of that? I mean, maybe you occasionally pick up one piece, but like I feel like it's actually a mystery to me, but I'm not sure if there's an organization that actually sends out people to frequently just pick up manually pick up all these pieces. So that's what I mean social responsibility. Not everyone wants to or can or feel responsible to partake in that. And then it brings me to the thought, if they're really drivers of change, can we expect them to have an outcome or to have an impact as holistic as we think they do? And I wonder if you can answer that question by looking at other dimensions of analysis. So what I mean by that is, well then, are the decisions made by these driver of change curators and city planners, are they like reinforcing class? Are they governing, like really governing or sort of, shaping how businesses operate, or who can even operate in that space? And then on the micro level, so that was like macro, like macro and meso, and then on the micro level, do their decisions actually govern how people actually go about the day? So those are just some thoughts.
Now, these are huge questions, and it's some of the first that the Chinese do ask. 15, 20 years, I would say 30 years ago, but up to, I'd say about 15 years ago, and I've had a large number, I've had maybe 100 students come here from China, from the time of Tiananmen Square onward. And until 10 or 15 years ago, you ask a question like this: where and how are these changes really happening so that we're having a big impact, say, on malls, or how to use illumination at night, illuminating bridges and having, et cetera. And the classic answer from many people who would say, well, the Central Committee of the Communist Party discusses this, is then discussed with the national government, and then this is implemented down, and we have this basically national, consistent 5-year plan, and that this is followed. Okay. When we then started working, in particularly with the city of Chengdu, we published now that we published we're now publishing roughly 10 books. Two just published this year in Chinese before we're publishing in English. Chengdu, they started with 5 years working with the city people, and we'd have 4-hour meetings with English Chinese discussion, and I heard more and more people who were Communist Party leaders and neighborhood activists, and they would say, we tear down a neighborhood, we want to make it into a more aesthetic scene, but we then talk to the residents and ask them, what would you like to have in the way of types of shops on your street and having that neighborhood but a little further away? I said, hey, is this a market? This is citizen driven. Is this a Benjamin? This is a Communist Party? Asking, not telling. So there's now a thesis in progress, the Communist Party's role in using scenes. And to look at this explicit, but quick, a slight correction. What is there in terms of the definition in the paper of these 15 dimensions? We have examples of some of these amenities, we call them, such as tattoo parlors or golf courses or barber shops and so forth. These things we chose not to say these are the causes, these are the source of power. We're trying to say these are measures of the concept. That is, of simply saying that the tattoo parlor is a measure of boho, but it doesn't say what the cause of boho is. So in that sense, so on the other hand, planners we do discuss, and that is, and that is because we see this visibly. Examples in the case of Chengdu, where we have people acting, saying, being in meetings with each other, talking about, well, how are we going to do this? How can we get more illumination of the bridges? In that sense, the having the normative definition of what might be an ideal bohemian scene, in this case, can be tattoo parlor, but can also then be green hair, or that these things are much less visible in China. I mean, these are the crude, visible American, what Northwest European types of bohemianism, but the Chinese were much later and much more reserved. And so we've got that they are now using these terms within China, but within but the many of the changes which I'm describing for China, I'm talking about this explicitly, and I'm comfortable because the France is ideal as well. There's a strong state in France. There's a strong state in China. There's a weak state in the U.S. in general. And so where does this make a difference? But then as we get people who are focusing more on the definition on lifestyle and on multiple types of consumption, we have people who are not just bohemians and this. And if you say you're middle class, that doesn't tell you much. I mean, we want to know, are you really a fan of skateboarding or of this? I mean, so we get PhDs and especially MAs. And you talk to people doing MAPS MA theses. Many people have not read John's book, and they're writing on what they really love. They really want to write about skateboarding or about tattoo parlors or about that is some particular aspect of lifestyle. But this is exploding in the last 30 years. It's not about a question, is it the business elite or the political elite? But so in that sense, as people have more educated, more money, and everybody is looking at this, hey, he's a New York Jewish. They used to be cutting edge. Now, these things tell us stuff all over, everywhere. The tie, the rural tie. Hey, this is a new style. Hey, I'm going to get one of those too. So in that sense, this is happening all around the world. And so how can we do this? It's very hard for any. So the Chinese Central Party, what do they say? What would you like? And so they're invent. So I'm conscious of Bourdieu's differences, and in the paper, if we talk about it, the novels and why the French novels and how this from Molière up through present, how these things change. The transformations within France and within Chicago, I'm sensitive of, especially because we do. This is, maybe I haven't said this before explicitly in this course. What's the basic value, the way that Americans value and what's distinctive in the classic book of what makes America different? Tocqueville. It's rural Massachusetts farmers saying, let's build a fence and that's the source of American democracy. This is Tocqueville. Does this work in Chicago? No. In the 20th century, say at least 1933 onward, this has been a Chicago and a China-style, strong party centralized political system. The dailies, they never read Tocqueville. And so Chicago is a great deviant case because it's not Tocqueville at all. And so we've got things that are closer to China. And so I've worked in Yugoslavia, I worked in Guinea, and I'm more close to that because so we were able we could so my book on the French University, nobody saw these things. No, they knew it, but they didn't write about it. It was taboo to write about this stuff. If you were French, you destroy yourself. If you're a foreigner, you couldn't understand it. I was sensitive to this because I was studying Chicago. I was in Chicago. I just come here and see, wow, this political system is not Tocqueville. It's very different. This is very strong, and it's clientelist, which is another theme. So we can capture clientelism with local variations. And so we find it in the Bridgeport neighborhood and in Chicago compared to most other cities. And in that sense, clientelism in the sense of the quid pro quo, you give a job. So one is three pieces. You have a political leader. You give jobs to your staff, and they get so-called patronage jobs. And the most widespread in Chicago was the Department of Sanitation. So you get, and so the sanitation, but the sanitation people, they then work as precinct captains in their individual neighborhood. And those then precinct captains pass out Christmas chickens or physical cash, or getting a son out of. So I mean, these are classic, simple clientelism, which you know well, because this is the main, in some form, the main way of politics being done in the whole world, including Chicago. And we now have it with, and I will say, in Biden and in Trump's families being criticized by the media and the press and by their political opponents quite visibly now. So this is not just in Bridgeport, this is also parts of national and international politics as well.
But if I understood your point, I also think that there's something where, in general, city governments are built on the idea of like what's good for business is good for everyone, like it was called like the growth coalition, and so
You're saying I'm saying this?
No. I'm saying this is the truth, as we Marxists know.
Okay,
You,
well, we
bourgeois
Marxists.
scientists.
Okay. You're speaking as a
Yeah.
green-haired Marxist.
They're used to
It's hard to see
working.
that green hair, but it's still there.
I've never had green hair. Nor did Logan or Malich or Domhoff, people who came up who've made this theory, but they're used to working with local businesses, where they can, right? So the thing I think that often happens is that they're going to find people who want to take this as like a neighborhood improvement project, and the question is the city going to foster it? And are they going to do it by giving them money, or by changing zoning laws, or just by making exceptions? So there's lots of rules that in America are just pushed to the side because it seems like everyone's agreed to ignore those rules. When you can have celebrations, what kind of permits you have to have, whether you have to, how many people can be together, right? So that means that cities can do a lot, but they can't do anything from scratch. And so they're usually going to they have to find partners in a community who want to increase this theme. And that means that they usually have to go with the last strong existence there. So if Chicago is going to help Ukrainian Village have a theme, it's not going to be Ukrainians. They're going to be that ship has sailed. There's not enough Ukrainians left. Like, we've had different migration streams. There are cases where actually there is dispute. Just to use the case of Chicago, like Andersonville, some people want to return. This is still a Swedish neighborhood. Others like, no, this is a lesbian neighborhood. If we're gonna, and then there's increasingly some who think that it's not an either or. We can do both these, but that's harder to theme, right? It's harder to have something that's like, this is the way it used to be in good old-fashioned Sweden, if you're not reaching to that historical period, right? But so it may be that in a case like that, city planners actually can be decisive by siding with some as against others. But they need to have people who are going to make that case that this is still a vibrant tradition, and they will. The work of Japonica Brown Saraceno, I think, is on the syllabus.
Yes,
Been
it is.
Right for here, yeah.
I summarized it a week or two, but we do mention it here.
Really good at showing how these kind of political efforts to commemorate are used to kind of brand an area and give it like, what kind of a meaning is this going to have? I think the thing that's sort of interesting is that it's just being done more and more deliberately. Aaron?
No, yeah, I was going to say like Tony Chang's recent book too, right, about the role the police play and deciding like through which community groups get permits.
What's the book called? I didn't know.
It's Tony Chang's new book, The Policing Machine.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
He's
Oh
great.
yeah, you would like it.
Yeah, it's great. I love it.
It's like it's all about the community policing process in New York, but it's a lot about how like NYPD has this authority to do what you said, like who gets a permit, how long does the event go, like where does the block party happen, and how they like kind of use those like sort of like civil administrative procedures to cultivate like particular types of relationships with particular, with community groups and sort of like ladder. Yeah.
But there are about 300 in New York. There's 700 in neighborhood festivals, we call them. There are about 700 here, more than twice as many here, and LA has about 200. So this is the neighborhood is the Chicago institution.
Eric?
I just wanted to say, so if I understood Professor Lovey Martin, your point that maybe these dimensions of power are like more integrated than what I was just kind of narrowly focusing on, just one narrow band in the middle. Well then, my remaining complaint is that there's no study that's broad enough, holistic, inclusive, and historical enough to tell us what emerges from such a multidimensional analysis.
No, there are lots of them.
I think that's right, because you can't, but you can't, all you can say is like, this is the, to sort of take Lena's way of thinking, like, I can tell you what the game is, but I cannot tell you who's gonna win. You know?
Yes.
So
Life is more complicated.
We're out of time. So I think that's a great place to end this. Yeah, that's the problem, multidimensionality. That's why we Marxists always win, because we have one explanation, and it's always true. It's always right.
Just redefine class and just call it life.
Yep. Touche. Excellent. Really interesting
Excellent.
conversation. Yeah.
You seem to want to add something further. You